Hey guys, welcome to Love, Life, and Politics, where we talk about love, life, and mostly politics. Per usual, bottom of the screen, link to my subscribe star, as well as all the people that I tend to watch throughout the week. Make sure you diversify where you get your intel from so you do not live in a bubble. Anyways, without further ado, three things I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to be Trump signed an executive order essentially targeting China, letting them know that we ain't playing. Miss Betty versus the Black Lives Matter graffiti, and Portland losing its mind. Quite a lot has happened this week. Let's get to it. First thing I want to talk about is Trump and him signing a super important executive order. I haven't really read too deep into it, but I've got the gist of what it's doing essentially. So Trump is essentially penalizing any company or entity or person that is essentially helping China in any way. So from what I've been able to tell, it's like if a company is restricting the freedom of speech of Hong Kong, or essentially siding with China over Hong Kong and democracy, they're going to be put on blast. They're going to be getting repercussions for that. Anybody who's supplying money or supporting China in any way, and it's very, from what I understand, it's very broad. So there is quite a lot that he can do with this in order to curb people trying to satisfy China above the free world, essentially. Because we've seen a lot in big tech, and Apple is one of the bigger examples who is willing to remove apps from the App Store to appease the Chinese government, because there was one app that was being used by the Hong Kong protesters to essentially get together and protest, and they removed it at the behest of the Chinese Communist Party, and a lot of people roasted him on that. And I do understand the point that it's a company that is trying to make sure it protects its bottom line, and China is probably a very big revenue stream. I'm sure that's where they get a lot of their parts from, a lot of manufacturing and whatnot, and they want to stay on their good side. But at the same time, it's an American company essentially allowing a communist party to restrict the freedoms of other people. At a certain point in time, again, I am one of those people that is very pro-capitalism, but if your capitalism is being used to hinder the rights of another individual, there's a reason why we don't allow monopolies. You're just restricting, you having a monopoly restricts the right of another individual to grow a company, to be able to have a free market that has competition and whatnot. So even in that, I somewhat support that to a certain degree. And I really do support making sure that the companies that come from our country in particular are above all representing and fighting for freedom and justice and democracy around the world. I don't think they should be in any way supporting dictatorships or communist parties in any way, shape, or form. And Trump's executive order is essentially putting everybody on notice that if you are trying to take the side of China financially, politically, he is going to use the strength of the federal government to make sure that it comes to a stop. So, again, conservative, I'm not a big fan of the government stepping in when it comes to businesses, and there's very few things that I would be like, all right, I'm cool with that. This is one of them. He's using his power to make sure that we're no longer being so dependent and strangled by a country that does not care about human rights in the least bit. Everybody's aware of how they have to have safety nets to essentially prevent people from jumping off of buildings. That's how bad the conditions are. And there's people apparently in concentration camps over there. I watched an interview, or a clip of an interview of somebody who represents China or whatever, and then they were essentially, because there's video of these people essentially being detained, being put in trains and stuff like that, and he was questioned on it, and you can tell he was dodging that hard. The Communist Party is essentially doing Hitler-esque things, and we cannot have American companies supporting that in any way. So that's essentially what this executive order is trying to do. It's putting all companies on blast. Get ready. We in China are not friends anymore, especially after this COVID whatnot. Anyways, next story is Miss Betty. Forget her first name, but she's a black woman who has been essentially going around. She's tried to stop protesters. I think she's one of those people, not protesters. She's tried to stop people at abortion clinics. She's one of those types of like really adamant pro-life types of individuals, but she's turned her sights towards this Black Lives Matter movement. And so there's this big old Black Lives Matter sign in front of Trump Tower, and she went over there and essentially just dumped paint all over. She did not care at all. And it's crazy because it's like, I think in the video, if I remember correctly, that so one of the people was like, yeah, call the cops, so get the cops to do something. It's like, you guys are literally protesting the cops, but then whenever anything happens that you don't like, you're the first to call the cops about it. Anyways, she's essentially trying to cover up the BLM. A lot of people want to call it mural. I call it graffiti. And she's chanting that we need to bring our cops back. You don't really care about black people. We're the ones that need the cops the most in our communities. Bring back our cops, refund our costs, blah, 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 continuing like that. And a lot of people are not happy about it. And I see a lot of people also, not a lot of people, but people are making the argument that, wow, you guys all of a sudden support graffitiing and putting paint in blah, 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 blah. But then whenever BLM or Antifa does it, you have a problem. No. This is a street. You essentially turned the street into a public forum when you allowed the Black Lives Matter to do that. I think I'm not sure if this is one of the ones that allowed or was like taxpayer funded, because I'm sure there's one, I forget what state it was, where the government actually like paid for some of the supplies to do this. Anyways, they changed their tone as soon as somebody from the Trump side was like, hey, okay, can I paint this? And they're like, the next day, they completely got rid of the Black Lives Matter because they did not want the other ones to be put on the street. Goes to show you that they really have a double standard for sure. But you turn it to a public forum. If you can draw something that is not the color of the street and somebody else comes up and blackens it out so you no longer see any messages, it's just black. I'm sorry. That's like somebody's graffitiing something and then I come along and I paint over it in the same color as what it was originally meant to be. Like somebody graffitis a white wall and then I come with white paint and cover over it. Sorry, bud, I'm not going to consider that me vandalizing. That's me restoring it to its former glory, so to speak. But she got a little bit of spotlight. It wasn't in the news for too long because, well, actually, it wasn't in the mainstream news at all, I think. It was very hush-hush because it didn't really fit the narrative that a black woman was saying these things. You notice in the media, they will never, ever, ever show that if it's a person of color, black person, this PC stuff is starting to get me, sorry, a black person doing something that they're not fond of, they won't put any airtime on it. If they do, it's going to be a split second and move it on because it doesn't support their narrative. So whenever we had a black person essentially thinking for themselves and not subscribing to all this other stuff that's forced down their throats, they don't want to cover it, but we definitely want to push that out. We want to say, hey, listen, it's not all black people who just fall in line. We have free thinkers. We have people who don't agree and they're going to voice their opinions the same way yours are, and they're not afraid to do it. So mad props to her. I hope she never does anything that really breaks the law. I pray that she stays within the law as best as she can, and that she's a good example to others as to what to do whenever these BLM people are starting to lose their mind. If their government is allowing them to do something, you use that same power in order for you to get your message out as well. And last thing is Portland. Oh my gosh, Portland. Portland has lost its mind. They're now attacking federal buildings and then trying to blame the federal agents for protecting the federal building. Dumb parents are now wrapping their arms around their kids and helping them attack a federal building. And then the mayor joins in these protests, gets not pepper sprayed, but tear gassed. It's just so much ridiculousness. And I think they're now trying to sue the federal government for doing its job. The federal government has the right to protect its property. If the state government and local government is not doing anything to protect its own property, letting that stuff get burnt down, and the federal government comes in and protects its own property, and now they're trying to sue them for protecting their own property, they done lost their minds. Portland is one of those, how do you say? It's a cesspool. I'd like to say that, you know what? Whenever liberals want to talk about how their governance works, I would like to point them towards Portland. This is what happens when liberals have their way. And maybe liberals isn't the right word to use, leftist. I need to make that distinction because there are good liberals. Leftist, I don't think there's not one. Because if you're a leftist, you're either ill-informed or you know what you're talking about and you still prescribe to the idea of communism. It just makes no sense to me why these people are getting the airtime that they're getting, and the majority of the U.S. citizen and U.S. populace does not agree with what's going on in these places, but they won't give them any airtime. And I do think what's going to happen from this is that Trump is going to sweep, because you've created an environment that people who disagree with you are afraid to vocalize that they disagree with you, so they stay hush hush. So you have a false sense of security because you're only hearing people that agree with you or pretend to agree with you espouse the ideas that you're trying to force down their throats. But when that election rolls around, they're ready, because there was a new poll that was actually out recently showing that a majority of virtually everybody in every political except the far left, a majority of them, or plurality of them, are afraid to talk about their opinions because they're afraid of the culture, the cancel culture. They're afraid of retaliation. They don't feel like they're safe to espouse their ideas or have conversations about it. They stay hush hush. And for conservatives, it's 77% that just, hey, listen, I'm just going to stay hush hush. I don't want to lose my job. I don't want anything happening to me or my family. I'm just not going to talk about it. But you best believe when they get into them polls, they're going to vote, because a significant majority of our country wants law and order. A significant majority of our country wants peace. And as much as the BLM, as much as the movement to try to curtail and get cops to be better, which there's always room for improvement in all things, and I'm not saying that the cops are perfect, nowhere close to it, but they're there for a reason, and you cannot get rid of them. You can make them better, but the idea of taking away resources is going to make them any better is probably the dumbest idea I've ever thought of, because they don't keep that. They're not consistent in that mentality. These people that are in Portland trying to get the police defunded are the same people that are wanting more money to be pumped into these schools, like in Chicago as well. And it's not making things any better. So if you're willing to pump money into something else that's not working to make it work better, and then all of a sudden when cops are involved, all of a sudden it's a problem, it's just logically inconsistent. Anyways, besides that, Portland is losing it. And Trump, I think, played his cards right. A lot of conservatives were trying to tell him, hey, get on this law and order thing early on. I think he made the right decision to wait it out. Maybe not wait it out, but strategically, smartly, if that's even a word, take his time in when he's coming in. He didn't just jump the gun on it. He was like, okay, I am the federal government, and he, as a conservative, believes in states' rights. So he lets the states handle what they want to handle. He offered help, and they said no to the help. So now they're in complete chaos, and even the leftist media has, as much as they're trying their best to conceal it, people are now starting to see how bad things really are there. They're trying to spin hard. But people are seeing what is really happening now. And now with Trump they've been blaming him, saying, oh, he's sending in the troops. And everybody's mind now is going to be like, okay, I've been seeing all this violence. These people have been saying there is no violence, but there clearly is violence. These people are saying that he's absolutely horrible for sending in people to try to curtail this violence, the federal government, National Guard. But they're saying he's evil for doing it. I'm going to start thinking, wow, this guy seems like the guy that wants to make sure that people don't come burning my house, don't come attacking my family, don't go killing my grandpa or my uncle who's an ex-cop, And I think this is going to work in his favor. I think the only thing that is kind of in his way. I think the economy is going to bounce back. I'm not really worried about that. Is the corona. I do think that if something significant doesn't happen, his chances of re-election are going to be a little bit tougher. But I'm one of those people that strongly isn't worried about the cove at all. Not at all. Yes, people are dying from it. Yes, people are dying from a whole lot of other ailments and diseases that we are not shutting down the government for. I do pray for people who have lost loved ones, and I pray for those who are sick and are kind of going through this. But I do think that this is something that's one of those, this too shall pass, and we're seriously blowing things out of proportion. But if you want to be more cautious, I'm not going to rank on you for that. But that's the one thing that I would say is really what is going to teeter-totter on how things end up in 2020. But every other indicator, he's been smart. He's been tactful in it, and I pray that he wins, of course, because if leftist governments are letting this happen right now, imagine when we have essentially a leftist puppet in Biden in office who's just going to do whatever the people who voted him in want. And we have clearly seen what they want and what they've espoused, getting rid of the police and letting rioters go crazy in their streets. But anyways, that's the 3 things that have happened this week. Thank you for listening. Please like, share, subscribe. Anything you can do to support this channel is greatly appreciated. I hope you guys have a blessed one. Stay safe.